Hello ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to VUX World, the Practical Voice Podcast. This week's episode of VUX World is brought to you by Speebly. Speebly is such an interesting company. It lets you take an existing Alexa skill or Google Assistant action and make it available on the front end of a website or enterprise app. And when I say make it available, I don't just mean put a link to it. I mean literally on the front end of your website, a website user will be able to interact with your skill or action via voice in the browser or via text in the browser. You are absolutely making the functionality and the whole skill and action available to be accessed via voice or text from a website or enterprise app. What that means is that you've already done the hard work, you've already built the skill and the action. Literally all you need to do is point the back end at Speebly and Speebly takes care of the rest. It will literally, this isn't a lie, it will take you 5 minutes to set it up. And Speebly, for VUX World listeners, have an exclusive offer, which is that if you're working with clients and you're building them Alexa skills or Google Assistant actions, which you're already doing anyway, if you make that skill or action for your client available on your client's website through the use of Speebly, your client will need to pay Speebly monthly to make that facility available, but Speebly will give you a percentage of the revenue every single month. It's a fantastic deal because it gives value to your client because you're taking the good work that you've already done and you're making it available on their website, which has already got traffic, and it's adding value to the users of that website because now they can interact with the website and access your action or skill through the website. Plus, for you get paid. You get a share of the monthly revenue that your client will pay Speebly in order to have that facility. Everybody wins. Your client wins, the user wins, and you win. So do check it out. Go to speebly.com/VUX to find out more and sign up. That's speebly.com/VUX. speebly.com/VUX. Check it out. On today's episode of VUX World, we are chatting to Bree Glaeser and Brooke Hawkins, and we are talking about in-store brand activation through voice. Essentially, what that means is using voice to increase sales in stores. The voice shopping has been, depending on which side of the fence you sit, it's either been touted as the future, and this is what it's all going to be. But then on the other side, it's been kind of, received with mixed reactions. We haven't really seen any hard numbers from Amazon or from Google. I think Amazon said that their voice shopping stats have increased threefold, but there's no numbers there. So how voice and shopping go together and how that will unfold in the future is still a little bit unknown, but Bree and Brooke with Mars Agency have been involved in working heavily on their in-store voice assistant that helps users make better decisions within the shopping environment and also actually increases sales. So this is voice shopping working in-store. Some fantastic design lessons, some interesting technical lessons from implementing voice in store as well, especially when you've got to kind of coordinate lights on shelves and all this kind of stuff. But it's a really, really good use case, and it's a good exploration of a use case. There's plenty of advice and tips in there as well, and it's just, it's an inspirational episode, put it that way. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'm obviously joined by Dustin Coates, as I am each week. This is Bree Glaeser and Brooke Hawkins on VUX World.
VUX World. VUX World. VUX World. VUX World. Branding with the big faces. I love listening to it.
Kane Sims.
Kane Sims, the one and only.
Britain's finest, Mr. Kane Sims.
Dustin Coates.
I like it when you guys are together and talking about voice.
Without further ado,
Welcome to the show.
Bree and Brooke, welcome to VUX World.
Yay. Thank you for having us.
You're very welcome. It's nice for you to join us, Brooke. We've been kind of chatting off and on for quite a while now.
Yeah.
It's nice that we've done it.
Definitely, yeah. I'm excited.
Cool. How's you, Dustin?
I'm doing all right, Kane. How about yourself?
Yes, not bad, not bad. For those listening, we're slightly delayed on this. I was caught at the office, so apologies before we begin. Apologies for the delay on this, but we're all here now, and we're going to chat about in-store voice shopping. And if we do have time, we're going to talk about voice shopping in general. But Bree and Brooke have both been working pretty much exclusively on voice shopping. Is that fair to say? Or have you done other voice projects as well?
I think that's fair to say. So we both work for the Mars agency, which is a marketing agency that's focused specifically on marketing kind of across the omni-commerce environment. So in simple terms, we're looking at shoppers and we're talking to shoppers all the time. So from a voice perspective, we definitely have that kind of shopping emphasis. So yeah, I mean, we also think about, how brands can kind of build equity with voice. But we definitely have a specific interest in helping them connect with shoppers.
And so, what about yourself, Brooke? Then, how did you get involved in Mars, and how did you get involved in voice?
Yeah, so I've been working in voice for pretty much my whole career at this point, and started designing IVR calls, so those really pesky robocalls that everyone loves so much for healthcare. And then from there, kind of dabbled in different areas of the voice or conversational world, like designing chatbots for different big Fortune 500 companies, designing courses to teach people what this new field is all about. And then ultimately I came back to Michigan. I'm originally from here, and found Mars and was really excited to see this work happening in my home state and joined the team. So now designing all of these really great voice experiences for brands like Bree mentioned.
Fantastic. And what about yourself then, Bree? How did you kind of get into voice, and what do you do at Mars?
Definitely a less direct path. So I used to work for, I used to be kind of in planning on the agency side, and we had this special project around putting voice at retail, just based on kind of feeling like we want to meet the shopper with the latest technology and, respond to where they are. So I joined the innovation team at Mars. It was kind of a pivot for me. So I had this research background. I joined this project so that we could design something that was really human-centered and solved a real consumer problem. So that was all at the very beginning of this whole kind of Smart Aisle voice at retail project. And that's how we kind of landed with the experience that we have now in the category that we have now. So I became a voice designer kind of by default, and just bringing kind of a strategic design background that I have to a new area. It's been really exciting to be able to kind of pioneer in such a new, I suppose you could say it's not new because Brooke has, experience that goes way back on the voice front. But once we see smart speakers in homes, it's like there's a whole new behavior that we're responding to. And that's kind of, as we all know, and being in this industry, that's really driven just a kind of a new field.
Definitely. Yep.
And so Mars, then, you mentioned omni-channel shopping. So Mars presumably does a whole lot more than voice. How much of, Brooke, it sounds as though you're purely working on voice full time. In terms of Mars, how much of Mars is kind of, how much of Mars's business, I suppose, is purely voice?
Voice is new for Mars. So it's a company that's been around for, 40 plus years. And they started with really pretty pure play retail activation. So lots of in-store marketing, activating brands in store. And we still do tons of that. So that's our bread and butter. But, as the world changes and shoppers shop in many places, we built an e-com team. And then in the last about 18 months, also this voice team. So we're small and nimble, but I think it's super important for Mars to be watching the voice commerce space because we need to be able to offer our clients the best thinking and about sort of the future of commerce.
You mentioned the in-store activation side of things. Is that where Smart Aisle comes from? And what is Smart Aisle? Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, we actually started in voice by creating a skill for Alexa for one of our brands. So that's Eucerin Skincare. And it was pretty quickly after that and this was actually prior to me joining the team, just by a few months, but the thinking was, why don't we try helping someone, with product selection at the point of purchase? So really right there in brick and mortar, like, why not? So that was the original thinking. And then, after lots of kind of, as I mentioned earlier, exploratory research, we have now, about 2 years later, come to the place where we have a voice solution for the whiskey category that's live in 5 stores out here on the West Coast. Those are BevMo stores. And we're helping shoppers decide, which we might like to purchase. So it's a really simple conversation. We've designed a few different kind of ways in, so it can appeal to both people who know a little bit about the category and maybe total novices. And then they can get like 1 or 3 recommendations, or up to 3 recommendations of what whiskey they might like to enjoy. So that's the beginning, and that's where it's at now. And we're really excited about kind of expanding into other categories, and helping shoppers with that sort of product selection and product education, I think, at the same time.
And what does that interaction look like when a customer wants to pick out a whiskey and use Smart Aisle?
Yeah, so basically they'll approach the shelf, and there's a lot of fun lights and signage to let them know how to interact. But once they do, they're greeted by the personality, which we've tailored custom for each of our clients so far. For BevMo, it's a personality called Bev, so she kind of guides them through a few questions. And we did a lot of research prior to that, so we know exactly, depending on how much users know about the product before coming to the shelf, we're really able to tailor those questions to make sure they're getting the information they need. Nothing that's too simple or too over the top based on where they're at. So after asking a few of those questions, then they get a really cool recommendation of what whiskey they should buy. And then all of those kind of IoT lights light up the products for them as well, so they can get a guided walkthrough and also a little story about each bottle that they're about to buy.
That's interesting. So, and I think I've seen this before we kind of had a chat and decided to do a podcast and stuff like that. I distinctly remember seeing it was a post online, which was a huge, cabinet full of whiskey, which, to be fair, is pretty much the perfect use case, because picking a whiskey is just a complete nightmare.
Right, so intimidating, so opaque, absolutely.
So presumably, I'm assuming it was Smart Aisle that I've seen. I'll dig out the things. I'm on one now for Marketing Dive. I don't know if that was specifically the.
Yes, that should be it. That should be us. So that's actually our first pilot, which was at Bottle Rocket Wine and Spirit in New York City. So we did a really scrappy first execution in 2018. So it was just a year ago that we did that. And it was also in the whiskey category. It was a little bit of a different VUI that was particular for that store. The personality there is the bottle genius. But that was super fun. I mean, the guys there, the owners, were such good partners in kind of coming up with what that shopping solution was. So that's the one that you probably heard about before.
And for the installation, are you bringing in an off-the-shelf device, an Echo or a Google Home there, or do you have custom hardware that needs to be installed?
Well, we have custom hardware when you look at the entire product, but we are also leveraging the off-the-shelf Echo. So the Echo is then connected to our IoT lighting system, which I think kind of gets, when we talk about this solution, kind of gets left out because it's a voice first solution. It's about the conversation, and we're really excited about that. But when we watch consumers use it, to be honest, it's the lights at the end that kind of light up each product that just make people like so excited. It's honestly like a magical experience watching people. Like, they just love the lights. So I don't want to leave that out. I think that's an important part of the solution.
Is that done through the skill, the control of the lights? Is that done through the skill, or is that a separate thing that you need to do to make? Because you go through the process, you'll be presumably filtered down from all of the whiskies through to a select few, depending on maybe a price or whatever, I'm assuming. is that the skill that will tell the lights which lights to work? Or is that something separate?
Yes. I mean, I'm not the product manager or the technical person, so I also don't want to reveal too much, but yes, the skill communicates with the lights.
And is that something you've got to design for, Brooke? Is that part of the design process, is figuring out how to filter down those products, or are you approaching it purely from the conversational side of things?
Yeah, that's definitely a part of what we think about as well. Definitely, we want to make sure that our recommendations are meeting people's expectations and aren't leading them to be, disappointed or feel like their recommendation didn't match what they said. So we definitely partnered this time with Distiller, which is a big repository of whiskey information online, to make sure that we had a lot of information about the flavor profiles and pretty much down to like very specific notes of each of those flavors or aspects of those whiskeys. And we actually create our own database so that we can match all of those bottles based on, I think it's something like 14 specific flavor profiles. So yeah, that's definitely something we think about in terms of the matches. And we're also thinking about things like how long should we pause between the lights when they're playing out those recommendations so that it doesn't feel overwhelming and it doesn't feel too slow. So we really do have a hand in every single part of making sure the recommendation feels helpful and useful and not overwhelming.
Where can you see this headed in the future? I would imagine that you're starting off with the beverage category, but I'm sure you've thought in the future as well. Do you see this being used in other sort of categories or in other things besides just recommendations?
Yeah, we're seeing that so far. We're about to do a few launches in a couple of different categories, so we'll definitely be testing our hypotheses shortly. But definitely in these kind of high information, high value categories where you're approaching a bunch of products and it's really hard to distinguish between them, I think we'll definitely see value for the product deselector. Some examples are like skincare, for example. It's a lot of information and hard to distinguish. Consumer electronics is something we thought a lot about. Definitely continuing with the food and beverage. I think there's a couple other key categories there that might be of interest. But yeah, I think there's a lot of room here, and I'm particularly interested in thinking in the future about how we kind of integrate more with in-store associates and other personnel and environmental things in the store. How can we maybe incorporate things like wayfinding or pinging different customer associates in the store? I think there's so much we can do in terms of thinking about the context that is interesting for the future.
I like the fact that you mentioned earlier the intimidation factor. I think especially in specialty stores when you're just getting into something, say it's a hardware store or maybe a sporting goods store, going in there and asking a person for help can sometimes be really intimidating because they know so much and you know next to nothing. And so having this to be able to guide the customers must be something that encourages foot traffic and encourages those beginners to come in.
Yeah, we certainly hope so. I think it was really, really important to us to create an experience that was not intimidating and not challenging. We kind of had this mantra, do not ask any questions that would be difficult to answer, and really connect shoppers to a lot of value without depending on them knowing a lot of information. So it's a really interesting challenge. Requires a lot of conversation with shoppers to figure out what kinds of questions they were organically asked, and how does that vary based on how much they know the category already, and then how can we translate that into real solutions. But I also like how you mentioned, that it can be intimidating to talk to a human. Definitely think that that's the case. But I also, want to admit or make the caveat that we don't think that we're replacing humans, at least not entirely. Particularly in the whiskey category, we found that there's a couple different ways of shopping, and one way really is dependent on a human giving you their opinion, and we can't replace that. So if somebody wants that expert's opinion, that's a role for a human. If somebody wants, a really, really tailored kind of AI matched solution recommendation, that's where we come in. So there's a different value that it offers. And I hope that it's complementary to the humans that are already in the store. It's at least my point of view on it.
Definitely.
So it sounds as though the the voice component is essentially dealing with facts, whereas the human deals with the ambiguity. So the human will say, well, I prefer this one because it's made in such and such, and I like smoky whiskies, so it's like that. Whereas the skill might, if you say, I just want something that's under £30 or $30 and something that is good for getting into, starting to like whiskey or something like that. Is that a fair analogy, that the voice component deals with the facts and the human deals with the ambiguity, or is that completely wrong?
Well, I think that we make an attempt to deal with the ambiguity a little bit more than the example you gave, only because we think that it would kind of be overkill if we just had a navigational tool, right? So if you just came up and said price and maybe Scotch or rye or something like that, I think that wouldn't be enough value. We light it up for you, like that's great. You could also read the label and see that. So we do try to get a little bit further. So I can give you a good example of one of the more popular ways to use it. We found that in this category, people usually or often come in and say something like, I typically drink X, right? So maybe I drink Woodford Reserve normally. And I want something that's a little bit similar to that. It's not going to be completely different, but is a little bit more special perhaps. So we can match based on that flavor profile of a current favorite. So that's one way that I think that the AI algorithm really helps deliver additional value beyond just, an associate kind of guessing, or maybe they don't know the category that well. That varies so much human to human.
Because essentially you've got all the data on every single whiskey, rather than the few favourites that the salesperson or the in-store clerk might have.
Yeah,
exactly.
And why is voice such a good fit for in-store? Because I think we've had similar conversations when we've been talking about voice in the enterprise, and some of the kind of things that tend to come up every now and then is that some people feel quite comfortable talking to their assistants in public or in the workplace or whatever. Some people either tend to use it at home, or they might use it, if there's no one around. Why does voice work well in store, and is there anything around current customer behavior? Are people kind of reluctant to use it? Do they see it as a novelty factor? Why is voice a good place to use in this example that you've been given?
I think that voice makes sense in retail because it is so frictionless, like for the same reasons that it makes sense at home. People have been trying to make mobile in retail work for a long time, and I think there's still barriers there, like having to download an app, having to take out your phone.
Scan a QR code.
Yeah, exactly. Those are all points of friction. And to actually just speak is so much simpler. We think that engagement is just definitely going to be higher. You do, also bring up a current challenge is that, comfort with voice services is still growing. So I think as people bring smart speakers into their homes, and now we're creeping up to 50% of households in the US, they get dramatically more comfortable with this kind of interface. And I think right now we're still seeing half of folks not feeling that comfort, but we really believe that will shift. Amazon and Google both have their assistant kind of everywhere strategies for 2019, and they see, voice assistants being really everywhere. And so I just think that is kind of a tide that we're gonna ride.
If you build Alexa skills or Google Assistant actions on behalf of clients, then you should check out Speedly. What Speedly does is it enables you to point the back end of your skill or action at Speedly. They'll then make it available via the front end of a website. So visitors of the website can talk through the browser to your skill and engage with it and use it as they would do as if they were talking to a smart speaker. Right now, Speedly have an exclusive deal for VUX World listeners, which is that if you make your client's skill or action available on your client's website using Speedly, your client pays Speedly a monthly fee, and Speedly will pay you a percentage of that fee. It's a fantastic way to earn monthly revenue, and it's a great way for your client to get some usage on their skill to extend the capabilities ease of their website to add voice to it, to add value to users, to let them interact with the brand via voice online. It lets you repurpose your skill outside of the smart speaker environment, and it earns you money every single month. It's a fantastic, great offer. Check out speebly.com/VUX to find out more. That's SPEEBLY.com/VUX. What are you measuring the effect of this in-store experience on sales? And is it actually driving sales, or is it people are just interacting with it for the novelty factor? Like, there's an Echo in my shop, I'll just play with it for a while. Are people doing that to play with it for an engagement in-store experiential thing, or is it actually driving sales?
Yeah, we're definitely measuring that data exactly like you mentioned. So we're getting that information from the stores that we're working with on a weekly basis as well as monthly, and we're reporting that data back to them. But we're definitely consistently seeing sales lift in the stores that Smart Aisle has deployed in, and particularly I think when stores are engaged and working with us to make sure that this pilot is successful, we're seeing an increased lift there as well. Yeah, definitely there is a correlation, I would say, between the bottles specifically on our shelf and the ones that are being sold most frequently.
Yeah, and we've actually been able to see that in both of our pilots so far in both stores. So both Bottle Rocket last year and Bedlow this year. It's been super exciting. It's definitely a key KPI for our retailers to see a sales lift. So it's not just novelty. I think that could be why people initially approach it, but we're consistently seeing year over year lift. And then in this pilot, we're also looking at some control stores. So yeah, it's been fascinating.
Wow. So it's not, because it would be an in-store experiential thing, you know, it would be interesting to have a go on it and to see it. And I would probably, even if I wasn't shopping for whiskey, I think I would go over and you know, have a little play around in it and stuff. But if it's actually doing the job that it's intended to, which is one, informing people, and then secondly, increasing sales, this seems like you might have struck gold with this.
yeah, we hope so.
Yeah.
So what are some of we talked briefly about fitting in the lights and the various lights that switch on and off depending on what whiskey you've recommended. What other design considerations have you had to kind of take into account when designing an in-store experience?
Definitely things like noise. There is a lot of background noise when people are shopping, obviously. So just in terms of how far people should stand from the shelf or what type of Alexa device we put on the shelf, that's definitely something we've had to think about. Visual design, so that's kind of outside of our conversational world, but something that we're very interested in testing in terms of bringing people into the shelf and how they recognize whether or not there's an Alexa on the shelf, and if Alexa, the word, has any kind of brand resonance with consumers, or the lights have more of a kind of draw factor for consumers. So there's a lot there to dig into visually, I would say, aside from the personality that we're designing.
Yeah, I think getting them to say the invocation correctly is
yes.
a really big one. Right?
That's always, yes.
Yeah, so how do we make that simple? How do we make it self-explanatory, right? So you can tell what the benefit is, and then just clear enough. One of the things that I know just from doing lots of shopper research is that people just don't read things.
Yeah.
So that's been a challenge for sure.
So what have you done then? How have you actually approached that? What is it? Making the sign bigger, or
yeah.
how have you actually gone about that?
I mean, as a good, kind of an interesting example, we debated whether to have the device be visible or hidden. And we decided that the visibility definitely helped communicate what's going on at the shelf. So there's lots of equity and there's lots of understanding when you see one of these smart speakers that you might recognize. So what we chose to do, at least in this activation, is we have that front and center. We have the invocation on a sign like right in front of it, eye level. But yeah, I mean, we're also working on a couple different ways into the experience to figure out how people want to shop it. One of the things that we learned from our first activation is that people some people wanted a very quick and not so guided experience that would be more like, tell me about this bottle. And so we wanted to design like a deep link into the product information, so people could also just kind of have that ad hoc experience. So now we have 2 invocations. We kind of have to balance having 2 invocations on the sign, but so far it's been working. It's been working good. But we track which paths people take, so that we know what's most useful to them, and we can kind of pivot going forward.
2 invocations of the same skill. So, ask such and such to tell me about monkey shoulder, as well as pick me a whiskey kind of thing.
Right. So it's currently Alexa open Smart Dial or ask Smart Dial to tell me about monkey shoulder. Yep.
So do you have any idea on the kind of, not necessarily usage numbers in terms of how many people are using it, but in terms of the roughly how many people are going to a specific store looking for that kind of product, actually try it? Is it like everyone just sees it and tries it, or is it kind of like, there's the people in the shop trying to get people to use it, or how, what do you have any idea of the kind of percentage of in-store shoppers that try this stuff out?
Yeah, I mean, it's at this point, it's not, we are fairly dependent on the associates kind of introducing people to it, bringing them over, kind of showing them demos. We found that that's been really important because it's a brand new thing. I mean, this is literally the world's first example of this. So I don't think people, a lot of times people walk by it, they don't notice it. And so they need that kind of little nudge in the right direction, at least right now. I think that'll definitely change.
And are people kind of exploring lots of, because if you can ask, tell me about this whiskey and that whiskey, but then you can also be presumably guided through some sort of process to narrow down whiskies or what have you. Are people engaging with it for a long time? Are they sticking around? Are they trying lots of different stuff, or do they just kind of, is it like an in and out kind of thing?
Yeah, I would say our research is showing once people make it through the first question or so, they definitely stick with it through to the end. So it's kind of just like a normal conversation. If they're hitting it off with the person or the personality that we've designed, they have commitment and will stick through to the end. But obviously there are people who will ask the first question and for whatever reason not want to commit or not be satisfied with what they're feeling at that moment and walk away. So it's kind of either or, I would say.
And what kind of things have you done to get them over that first question hump?
That's a lot of the stuff that we're testing out now. So definitely making the value proposition really clear from the beginning, making it clear what users can expect from the interaction right from that first question, keeping it brief, not over-explaining what we're doing while trying to make that value proposition clear so that we can kind of get on with the interaction. And just really making it clear all of the different ways that users can respond so that they don't have to feel like they're being corralled into a specific type of experience. We can really take in millions and millions of different inputs. So we just want people to say whatever they feel comfortable with. And obviously that's a lot of information to describe in 2 to 3 sentences. So we're doing a lot of A/B testing now to determine what rings the best.
How are you going about doing that A/B testing? Are you just launching different versions of the skill in different stores?
Exactly. Well, we actually use Dashbot to do reporting on our end, so we can see exactly what kind of language that we're launching out into the world and measure the interactions after that. So seeing how many times each different version of a text was launched out to users, and then whether that made them continue on with the conversation or if they dropped off right after that. So definitely have a lot of data that we're getting back about everything that we're saying and measuring that and kind of going with the one that works the most successfully.
You mentioned that you've mentioned persona a couple of times. Have you had to design a specific persona for each installation, or is there one skill that specializes in whiskey and it's the same persona?
We've so far had a different persona for each of our launches, not within each store for Bevmo, but for Bevmo as a whole, we customized our personality to really resonate with their brand personality and social media presence and marketing presence, really kind of rings true to who they are as a company. Our personality for Bottle Rocket is so different just because it's kind of a mom and pop store. The two owners are so embedded in the culture and the sales process of that store. So they're really infused in that persona, and it wouldn't make sense, I think, at a store without those two people there. So, but yeah, that's definitely something we're continuing to see over time, whether that makes sense to continue making these hyper customized personas that match the store that they're based in, or if Smart Aisle itself is a persona that kind of has any brand recognition or something like that with consumers, so that the persona could kind of begin to become its own thing.
Are you using like text to speech then, or are you recording all of the audio?
Just text to speech for now, in the Alexa voice or the Google voice, whatever we've used for each of our installations.
That's interesting. So you're using both Google and Alexa?
Yes, yeah. We have yet to launch our project that is going live with Google shortly, but yes, for that next project, we will be venturing into the world of Google for that install.
How have you decided when to use each?
To be honest, it's fairly client driven. So as you can imagine, some retailers are just not thrilled about having Amazon in their store. So, we're also curious about which one's going to work best for us. So we're at the stage where we're experimenting with the product. So it's just as useful to us to kind of play around with both. But yes, there's some client demand as well.
Do you have any plans or any thoughts to take this connection that you're making in store and go into the customers' homes as well? Is there a connection to be made there?
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity. It's not like on our immediate roadmap, but I think there may be some low-hanging fruit. And that's one of the things that I think will come with our continued conversations with Venmo as we assess the pilot and what the next steps are.
Was there any other, Dustin mentioned about some of the installation challenges you might have had. Have you had any other technical challenges in putting this together, or has it been essentially just a routine Alexa skill build?
Other than, we're working with a team of developers and our product managers. I think some of the most pressing technical challenges, I would say, are just kind of deciding what a best practice is in this world where there isn't a lot of best practices to follow. So when should the lights play, or how long should we pause between different language pieces, for the sake of building all of this stuff and kind of aligning with what we think will resonate with users. We're kind of creating all of these rules as we go. So that's definitely been challenging to figure out what we want to test, how we want to measure it, when we want to make those changes in order to be as effective as possible. I would say that's probably our hugest technical challenge at the moment.
Just look at the two activations that we're doing this year. So we did whiskey, and then our next is going to be in skincare. And you can imagine that product shelf set is way different. Products are much smaller. So there's hardware challenges to being kind of category, like to having such a wide range of categories. So yeah, there's lots of interesting business questions at this stage.
And have you treated both of those projects as entirely independent projects? This one is whiskey, this one is skincare. It's completely different products, completely different use case. So we're just going to treat them both as standalone projects, or have you taken like the core structure of the whiskey skill and applied that to the skincare and made a few tweaks?
Yeah, that's kind of $1 million question. In this particular instance, we have basically started from scratch. I mean, we know what works in terms of like the length of the conversation and how many questions we want to ask, and but the specific parameters are based on understanding how people shop that category. So we have to start with insights that are related to this skincare category, and also figure out what words shoppers use. So there's definitely a discovery period. At every new category has to have its own.
It sounds as though, so if Mars are typically a kind of agency, it sounds as though, and I don't know if there's any other examples in Mars where this kind of thing has happened, but it sounds as though you've now become almost like a product company as opposed to an agency resource, in terms of you've now got this this skill which you can essentially almost white label for different businesses, different product categories, and all that kind of stuff. So is this something that Mars typically do, or is this a kind of new kind of thing in terms of becoming almost like a software provider in its own right?
Yeah. We actually, Smart Owl, we do kind of treat as a startup inside of the Mars agency. Brooke and I do more than just work on Smart Owl, but there is an exclusive Smart Owl team. And you totally hit the nail on the head that it is, basically a software company where we have a product, and we behave that way. Mars has that history of kind of inventing and spinning out new companies. So we are very much part of that legacy.
And what advice would you give for the in-store experience? I think you seem to have stumbled on something that is, I think the potential for it is huge. And I'll ask you, the next question will be, where do you think it's going? But first, for people who, brands who have physical locations, and for, even brands that sell particular products in physical locations, what kind of advice would you give them if they're considering bringing voice in store?
I would say specifically, I definitely think in the next year and few years out from now, brands are going to need to have a presence on voice. And I think people expect that, definitely when they're in the home, being able to deliver things to their door or have things ready for pickup at the store. That's just something that consumers are wanting and have a desire to have. And I think as it relates to the in-store experience, when consumers then go in-store, they're going to have more familiarity with voice experiences and voice as a medium, and meeting them there and having a solution for that will only become more and more essential as time goes on. So
you think that voice shopping is not just necessarily picking the product from in-store and helping people narrow down their product selection, but there's a bigger thing here, which is that voice and shopping in general is something that you think is forecast to grow.
Exactly, yeah. It's huge. I think everything from being able to place orders in your home to getting customized recommendations about what you should buy after you've made a purchase in the past is all coming down the pipeline. So I think we're going to see radical shifts in terms of people going to grocery stores and buying the things that they typically would buy and then go home, and that's kind of a cumbersome experience, to things like getting all of your grocery items delivered to your door and you didn't even have to say anything about that. It just came to your house because of algorithms based on your past purchase behavior. So I know there are a lot of steps in between those two things, but it's coming, and definitely something that Amazon and Google are both trying to crack the code on.
Yeah, I think voice shopping at home is it's a really, really ripe territory. And there's lots of critics out there that say, voice shopping's not happening. Nobody wants to do it. Just a wide range of statistics that contradict each other about how much it's actually happening. But I think that, in the next year, we're going to see a brand or retailer really start to build that experience on top of the voice service platform that is actually a great one. I have my eye on Walmart for sure. They just stepped out of the Google Express network to build their own shopping action. And I think that they are thinking in this way. And, maybe once we have that leader, it will become clearer to other brands and retailers. But it's really just somebody has to make that experience that's enjoyable to use and that works. And then it's totally going to take off.
Do you see that? So, for example, if you're advising clients not on the in-store stuff, but now we're going into the home and we're voice shopping in the home, would you be advising clients to consider Google as opposed to Amazon, or is Amazon equally as open to third-party retailers?
It depends on. So we advise brands to consider both platforms. They have their own individual opportunities. It does appear that kind of retail partnerships are a little bit more, they're further along on the Google side, and that makes more sense for that to be part of their strategy. But on the Amazon side, there's also a lot that they are willing to do to kind of help with test and learns and figure out what shopping looks like on their platform. So I think it just depends on your immediate goals, and eventually you're going to want to be in both places.
Fantastic. Well, Bree, Brooke, this has been an absolute pleasure. Where can people reach out to you and follow you online and find out a little bit more about Mars and you know, follow the stuff that you're up to?
Sure. People can follow me on Twitter. I'm very active there. It's at Brooke B. Hawkins. And I'm on LinkedIn a lot as well, publishing a lot about what we're doing at Mars. So we recently published a voice playbook for brands to get into the shopping world. So I'll post links for all of that as soon as this episode comes out so people can find that information.
Cool. I'll put it in the show notes.
For me, it's all about LinkedIn, so I'm happy to connect and kind of with anybody who's in the space and have conversations. So you can find me there.
That was Bree Glaeser and Brooke Hawkins. Thank you so much for joining us, Bree and Brooke. The best and biggest observation from that discussion, possibly even a revelation, was that their in-store voice assistant that helped people narrow down a product has actually been proven to increase sales. I don't think we made as big a deal of that as should have been made. It's proving that it is increasing sales in store. They have hit a goldmine, seemingly. I mean, I can envisage a world where every single aisle has one of these, because that's the whole point in... Who was it? Was it Steve Krug that wrote The Paradox of Choice? Was it Steve Krug? Let me just check. Quick Google. Paradox of Choice. Barry Schwartz. Sorry, Barry. Barry Schwartz, Paradox of Choice. And the examples that he gives in that book around how too much choice can actually prevent you from making a decision was stuff like, you know, if you're in a supermarket and you've got a whole shelf full of different types of beans, then it's impossible to make a choice on which type of beans you should go for. This is the prime example of where voice can be used to overcome the paradox of choice, and it's absolutely fantastic. Looking forward to seeing that rolled out in a shop near me, hopefully soon. Thank you, Bree and Brooke, for sharing with us what is probably... It's the best news I've heard. It's the best example of voice in commerce that I've really seen hard evidence of. Probably, maybe ever. I don't know. The Virgin Trains is probably going to rival it, but fantastic use case. So I hope that inspired you to go out there and start thinking about how you can use voice to help customers make better decisions and to increase your sales, and how voice can be used as a core part of the purchase journey. Thank you, Bree and Brooke, for joining us. Thank you, Dustin, as always. And also, as always, thank you all for listening. Until next time, see you later.